So here we are. Unfortunately, I get cut off in my last escapade. I'll try this again. So we will try this again. I'll deal with the issue actually of the tree that never grew, and the bird that never flew, and the bell that never rang, and the fish that never swam, and the ring that was lost and found. And obviously these are this is the coat of arms of the Bishops of Glasgow. So we'll start with the tree that never grew. The tree that never grew is actually a yew tree. It was actually planted by St Mungo in the year 560, and it was actually chopped down by a man called Robert Tennant in 1736. So it actually sat on the Gallowgate, and what we now know is, if you were to look at the present Saracen Head pub, if you look to the left of it, is a low line of shops, and on that site was where the tree that never grew was, until 1736. So the important thing is, here we have the tree that never grew, the yew tree. It can live up to 5,000 years, but unfortunately that one didn't. So we deal with the issue of the bird that never flew. Now, the bird that never flew were the white doves that roosted on that tree. So these were the white doves. Now we also have the bell that never rang. The bell that never rang was actually the bell that was on the bishop's crosset, the staff, as he walked along the road, and people would bring food out to him, and of course he would do prayers for them and all this kind of stuff. So the thing is that we have Christianity arrives in Scotland. We don't get that till about the year 520, because originally the monks actually were in Rathlin Island in County Antrim. That's where what you would call the University of Study was. Now, Scotland, as we know it, did not exist until the year 495, when the Scottish came over from a place called Old Ariada, we now know it as County Antrim, and then colonised the area of what we now know as Kilmartin. Now, Kilmartin is the oldest populated place in Scotland. The important part is, if you go up to Kilmartin, you'll find the standing stones and all the rest of it. Now, as you go up to the very top, you then have you're going back to the Metholithic. So we're going back 7,500 years back to the Metholithic. So the early Stone Age. So then we start to move forward. Now, as the ice has been melting, that melted water, the water level is now dropping. So people are now able to go further down the glen, because as the water is retreating, the land is actually rising. Now, they then start placing monuments. Now, the important thing about these monuments, these stone circles, is the fact that the trouble with these stone circles, they're there for a reason. And that reason is to deal with the part most to do with being a calendar. So clearly, obviously, you have a particular line, like the Northern Star. It would line up the horizon in the spring, and so this was the time to actually plant your crops. Then, of course, obviously, you have the North Star coming down. As it actually dropped below the horizon, you would end up having the situation where the cross you can actually see on the sky. It would then line up there, and it would then tell them, well, it's now time to lift the crops. So this was the function of it at first. Unfortunately, they forgot to actually the reason why they did this, and they end up actually starting to remember their dead and all the rest of it. So they started actually building these burrows and all the rest of it in the year 5, the Neolithic period. Now, you would go from the year 5,400 years down to about 2,500 years, and this will then take us in, obviously, to the Bronze Age and Stone Age and what have you. So this is what's important about Kilmartin and the story of how the Scotties came to Scotland. They colonised the area Before this, we had the picks, and the picks were the painted people. The bodies were painted, so they would use actually probably wood or something like that to actually paint their bodies. So the last Pictish king we actually had was King Alexander III, and he died on the 13th of March in 1286 at Kinghorn. He was riding his horse, he was drunk, supposedly he was going back to Dunfermline, but unfortunately his horse slipped and went over the cliff, and unfortunately so was the end of Alexander III. So the important thing is also that this Alexander III, this is where we start to get the problems, and the reason for the start-up of William Wallace, and obviously Robert the Bruce and what have you. There were 13 claimants for the crown after the death of Alexander, and it was his granddaughter, who was only 4 years old, and they decided that she would have it. But the trouble is that other people had other ideas, and she ended up dying from actually of influenza, probably. She certainly died on the way back, so she ended up dying. Now, the important thing then is obviously I've digressed away from the coat of arms of the bishops of Glasgow for a reason, because I come back to this later. I want to explain actually how North and South Queensferry got its name, because we had somebody what the name is now? Malcolm III. I think I'll have to get back to this. I've actually gone and forgotten her name now. Queen Margaret. Queen Margaret Canmore. So King Malcolm Canmore, he was the King of Scotland. He actually died in 1093 at the Battle of Ancram, and 2 weeks later, the Queen Margaret actually died of a broken heart. And this is where, if we go up to the Edinburgh Castle, if you go up to the little church on the top of the Edinburgh Castle, that's the oldest part of the castle. It dates back to 1120, and that's the part of David II actually placed that chapel there in memory of his mother. So there we go. It's pure and simply. And that's for the story of the castle actually sits on top of a volcano. Not true. I'm afraid it's volcanic rock, not a volcano. The difference is it's the ice age that strips away the earth surrounding a volcanic plug. Now that the volcano, it wasn't a volcano because it's molten lava that solidified within a cavity, and of course then along comes the ice age and strips away the earth and leaves that plug exposed. So the original actually volcano is actually on Atha's Seat. Now Atha's Seat is funny because it's now only a third of the size of it was. The volcano was only a third now of the size of what it was. You can see how big it is now, but that's only a third of its size. Now we have some curious stories, obviously, in the case of the Piper going down into the hidden tunnel that runs actually supposedly from the castle and goes down to Holyrood. Total and utter nonsense. The reason actually why is because when they were deciding to build the new Edinburgh and the new town, the problem was in 1768 they started doing this. Now they then started to use the material that they removed from those excavations and put on what we now call the mound. So the mound of earth that separated them, there was a chasm in between the castle and what we now know as High Street. And that area was all filled in. So physically, it is not possible for a tunnel to be there, run all the way down, because there was humps going all the way down the High Street, and they were actually filled in. So obviously, they would use actually. This is how you would end up using the making a brick wall, a tunnel as such, and then of course filling in the area. So it's important to understand the nonsense behind this so-called tunnel that ran down to the Holyrood Palace. Now, Holyrood is intriguing because it gets its name because of David II. Now, in the case of David II, he was out actually hunting, and he was ended up charged. He was actually charged by a deer that attacked him, and of course, he may have been actually killed, but as luck would have it, the lightning came down and struck the deer and struck it down dead. And this is actually how we get the story of Holyrood, otherwise the Holy Rood being the holy staff from God that struck down this deer that actually attacked David II. So there we go. This is the story, obviously, the reasons actually why. But I'll come back now. I'll get actually more time to actually the story of the bell, and of course the St Mungo come from Cooris and Fife. He was shipwrecked in Fife when he was born, and that's another long story, but we'll skip that part. So here he is, arriving in Glasgow at the year 560, plants this yew tree, and unfortunately it gets chopped down in 1736, as I said already. Now, then we have to find out, well, what about the fish that never swam? Well, the fish that never swam is a story we have to then go to Rutherglen, because there, Rutherglen is named after King Ruther, and King Ruther was over 50, and he married a young girl who was only 14. Now, he gave her a valuable ring, and unfortunately, she didn't love the king and threw the ring into the Clyde. So, here he is. Unfortunately, the king got to hear this, and it was decided, right, she couldn't produce the ring, she was going to be killed. So, she went to St Mungo, asked for his help. He told her to go to the first fish, go to the first fisherman, caught the first fish, and there in the lip of the fish would be the ring. So there we go, the ring that was lost and found. So here's the tree that never grew, here's the bird that never flew, here's the bell that never rang, here's the fish that never swam, and here's the ring that was lost and found. There we go. Enjoy the story of a short history, a quick history of Glasgow, and obviously the history is actually going round to north and south Queensferry, and obviously up in Edinburgh. So there we go. Enjoy. Yep, I seem to have more actually time on my hands for some reason. So, what can I do with it? Not a lot. I've only got 1.5 minutes. So, we can deal with it. We used to have actually, Glasgow used to have a castle, as Edinburgh did. But unfortunately, we chopped it down. We actually chopped it. We actually they destroyed it in 1792 after when the building of the very first Royal Infirmary, which actually was removed in 1905. So the important thing is that site where directly in front of the cathedral is where the castle stood, which is why it's called Castle Street. So there we go. But obviously, I have now 30 seconds. So we deal with the issues actually around us, and the fact that this castle actually stood all the way out into the high street, the directly in front of that main road we now have, and the little white cottage that actually stood in what was now in between the traffic lights, or where the crossroads are, and of course where we can also see the statue to William of Orange. But unfortunately, this is about to run out of time, I think, because it seems to be 30.